Hudson Yards, the mixed-use development on the far west side of Manhattan, built by the Related Companies and Oxford Properties Group over the western rail yards of the Long Island Railroad, opened its first phase in March 2019 as the most expensive private real estate development in the history of the United States, a project whose total investment exceeds $25 billion across its full build-out. The development contains more than 18 million square feet of commercial, residential, retail, and cultural space, across a platform built over active rail yards, connected to the rest of Midtown Manhattan by the number 7 subway line extension that the City of New York funded as the infrastructure investment necessary to make the western far west side developable. The number 7 extension alone cost approximately $2.4 billion. The broader package of public subsidies, tax incentives, and infrastructure investments that the City and State of New York assembled to enable the Hudson Yards development is estimated at approximately $6 billion in present value, making it the largest public subsidy for a private real estate development in New York City history. The Hudson Yards development delivered genuine quality. The towers are architecturally distinguished. The vessel, for all its controversy, is a genuine public amenity. The shed is a functioning cultural institution. The retail and hospitality program in the first phase was executed at a standard consistent with the development's ambition. The forensic entry point is not whether Hudson Yards is a real estate success. It is the relationship between the public subsidy that made the development possible and the commercial performance that the subsidy was designed to catalyze. The specific commercial performance variable that the public investment's return calculations most depended on was office market demand, the absorption of the millions of square feet of new Class A office space that the development added to the Manhattan inventory, at the rental rates that would generate the tax revenue and economic activity the public subsidy was designed to produce. The COVID-19 pandemic and the structural shift to hybrid work that followed it have produced an office market in which Hudson Yards' office towers, some of the newest and most technically advanced commercial buildings in the United States, cannot achieve the occupancy rates that the public subsidy model required. The public paid $6 billion. The offices are partially empty. If this is your first case file from this channel, subscribe now, because every episode adds one more layer to what you are about to understand about the architecture of institutional failure. The public finance architecture of Hudson Yards was assembled through a combination of mechanisms whose complexity was proportionate to the scale of the development challenge the project represented. The number 7 subway extension, funded by the City of New York through a tax increment financing mechanism that pledged future property tax revenues from the Hudson Yards district to repay the construction bonds, was the foundational infrastructure investment that converted the far west side rail yards from an inaccessible industrial frontier into a buildable urban extension of Midtown Manhattan. The tax increment financing mechanism required the property tax revenues generated by the Hudson Yards development to meet specific targets in order to service the bonds that had funded the subway extension. Those targets were based on commercial real estate absorption projections that the office market conditions of 2019 were beginning to validate, and that the office market conditions of 2020 and 2021 abruptly invalidated. The covenant that the public finance model did not adequately stress test was the one embedded in the structural relationship between the commercial real estate market's dependence on in-office employment density and the specific use case that the Hudson Yards office towers were designed to serve. The development's office towers were designed for large corporate tenants in financial services, technology, and professional services, the sectors whose employees would commute from across the metropolitan area to occupy floors in towers that had been built with the assumption that 5-day-per-week office occupancy was the permanent condition of large organization white-collar employment. That assumption was correct for the prior 50 years of commercial real estate development in Midtown Manhattan. It was not correct for the 5 years following the development's opening. The hybrid work transition that the pandemic accelerated did not eliminate demand for large corporate office space in Manhattan. It reduced the per-employee square footage that corporations required, changed the premium attached to certain building features, and altered the relationship between office location and employee commuting patterns in ways that made the far West Side's distance from traditional transit hubs a competitive disadvantage that the No. 7 extension had partially but not fully addressed. The Hudson Yards office towers are excellent buildings in a challenging location, serving a market that has contracted in ways their public finance model did not anticipate. At what point does a public subsidy model's failure to stress test structural market shifts become a form of public financial mismanagement? Leave your analysis in the comments below. The appraisal methodology underlying the Hudson Yards public subsidy model shared the foundational error documented across this channel's archive, but expressed it through the specific dynamics of public finance projection rather than private real estate underwriting. The tax increment financing model required the Hudson Yards district's property tax revenues to grow from a base of approximately zero on a platform that did not yet exist to a level sufficient to service approximately $3 billion in bonds over a 20-year period. That projection was built on commercial real estate absorption assumptions calibrated to the Manhattan office market trajectory of the mid-2000s through 2019, a period during which Midtown Manhattan had demonstrated sustained demand for large-format Class A office space at the rental rates that new development required to be financially viable. The projection incorporated no stress scenario for a structural shift in office demand of the magnitude that the hybrid work transition produced. The absence of that stress scenario was not unusual. No public finance model for a major commercial real estate development in any American city had incorporated a structural hybrid work transition as a planning scenario, because hybrid work at scale was not a feature of the American economy before 2020. The appraisal failure was therefore not a failure of analytical rigor in the conventional sense. It was a failure of imagination, the inability to model a future that had no precedent in the historical data that the projection methodology used as its primary input. The Hudson Yards office towers face the appraisal challenge that any genuinely innovative market condition creates. The models designed to value them were built for a world that no longer exists in the form that justified the public investment. The No. 7 extension connects Hudson Yards to the rest of the subway system. The hybrid workers who take it to the office 2 or 3 days per week are generating occupancy statistics that the tax increment financing model's debt service calendar treats with indifference. The bonds are due on the schedule the bonds specify. The office workers arrive on the schedule that their employers' hybrid policies permit. The gap between those two schedules is the specific form of fiscal risk that the $6 billion public investment created for the city of New York. If the forensic analysis this channel conducts is changing how you read real estate headlines, the like button is how the algorithm knows to send this case file to the next analyst who needs it. The retail component of Hudson Yards' first phase produced a specific failure that was visible before the pandemic, and that the pandemic accelerated to a point of commercial non-viability. The retail program, which included approximately 1 million square feet of shopping space in a mixed-use environment, anchored by Neiman Marcus and a collection of luxury and aspirational brands, was conceived for a retail market in which the Hudson Yards neighborhood would generate sufficient residential and office population density to support high-end retail without depending primarily on tourist or destination traffic. Neiman Marcus filed for bankruptcy in May 2020 and permanently closed its Hudson Yards location. The retail vacancy in the shopping component has been among the highest in Manhattan since the pandemic, a condition that reflects both the broader structural challenges facing physical luxury retail and the specific challenge of a retail destination that had not yet achieved the organic neighborhood density that its viability required before the pandemic eliminated the tourist and destination traffic that had been substituting for that density in the interim. The institutional denial embedded in the Hudson Yards development is the collective denial of the public and private participants who assembled the project, the city and state of New York, whose public finance model required commercial performance assumptions that the post-pandemic office market has not validated. The related companies, whose development thesis required both office market performance and retail market performance, at levels that the market conditions of the project's first operating years have not produced, and the commercial real estate community's broader denial that the structural relationship between urban development and in-office employment density was a permanent feature of the Manhattan economy rather than a historical condition whose continuation was not guaranteed. None of the participants in the Hudson Yards development were acting in bad faith. All of them were building models for a world that the pandemic disrupted before the development had operated long enough to demonstrate whether the models were correct. The specific irony of the Hudson Yards case is that the project may still prove commercially viable over a sufficient time horizon. As the far west side continues to develop, the neighborhood density increases and the office market stabilizes around a new equilibrium. The public bonds that financed the No. 7 extension will mature before that equilibrium is established with certainty. Hudson Yards. Phase 2, which includes the western portion of the site with additional office towers, residential buildings and public space, has not yet broken ground, as of the time this episode was produced, a status that reflects the market conditions of the post-pandemic period that have made the financial justification for proceeding with the second phase more difficult than the first phase's opening had suggested it would be. The vessel, the sculptural public amenity at the center of the development's public plaza, was closed to visitors for extended periods following a series of deaths by suicide that produced a redesign of the structure's access protocols, a development that added to the list of factors complicating the development's ability to generate the neighborhood vitality that its public investment required. The Shed, the cultural institution at the western edge of the first phase, continues to operate as a genuine addition to New York's cultural infrastructure, though at a scale and with a programming model whose commercial sustainability has been a subject of ongoing discussion within New York's arts funding community. What the Hudson Yards case reveals in the context of this channel's 44-case archive is the specific category of public investment failure that arises when the commercial assumptions underlying a public finance model are disrupted by structural market shifts that occur after the investment commitments have been made and before the commercial performance required to service them has been demonstrated. This is not the failure of a bad investment made carelessly. It is the failure of a well-designed investment made at the wrong moment in the relationship between urban development and the employment patterns that urban development requires to generate the tax revenues that public finance models depend on. The $6 billion in public subsidy created a neighborhood. The neighborhood is real, architecturally distinguished, and commercially incomplete. The office market that was supposed to fill it has changed its relationship to daily occupancy in ways that the public investment cannot require it to undo. If this case file changed how you evaluate the relationship between public infrastructure investment and commercial real estate performance in post-pandemic urban development, subscribe, because the next case examines what happens when the commercial assumptions were correct and the public investment still produced inadequate returns, And in the comments, given the structural hybrid work transition that has impacted Hudson Yards office absorption, what specific stress testing requirement should be included in the public finance approval process for tax increment financing models whose debt service depends on commercial real estate absorption at specific occupancy and rental rate thresholds? The case file is open. This content was developed using artificial intelligence tools as part of the research, writing, and production process. All AI-generated material was subject to human review, editorial intervention, and approval before publication. Factual claims, interpretive framing, creative direction, and final content decisions reflect human judgment throughout. This disclosure is provided in accordance with platform transparency standards for AI-assisted content.